Welcome to episode 118 of the Forward from 50 podcast, where we interview people over 50 who are pursuing new direction for their lives. It's an opportunity for men and women to tell their stories, their way, and in their own words. I'm Greg Gerber, the founder of Forward from 50, and your host for today's show. Today's guest is Dawn Fleming, an adventurous soul who traded the fast-paced lifestyle of Southern California for something much more fulfilling: retirement overseas. After weathering the storm of the 2008 financial crisis, Dawn and her husband embraced a new beginning by sailing 5,000 miles to Florida and eventually settling in Mexico. In this episode, Dawn shares her journey of reinvention from being an attorney and network marketing professional to truly living her dream life in retirement. She discusses the concept of midlife retirement, her perspective on aging, and what it really means to find purpose beyond 50. To help others discover the dream life she enjoys, Dawn also wrote a book about her experiences. To tell us more about her adventure, please welcome Dawn Fleming to the show. Thanks for joining me today, Dawn. I really appreciate it. You are doing something a lot of seasoned citizens wish they could do: travel and live abroad. What prompted this?
Gosh, we didn't mean to, actually. It really resulted from the aftermath of the 2008 great financial crash. Tom and I were living in Southern California. Everything was going great. And then all of a sudden it wasn't. And so we got blindsided by that whole thing. And before that, we had actually wanted to relocate from California. He grew up in Newport Beach, and I lived there for about 20 years. And then we got tired of the rat race there, and we wanted to move to Florida. But our plans were delayed by quite a few years because of that crash. And then ultimately, we finally said we can't put our whole lives on hold because of real estate that we can't do anything about. We couldn't resolve that issue. We had, in 2006, purchased a 48-foot sailboat. He grew up a sailor. I grew up on the waters of Minnesota, so I was very comfortable on the lakes. We jumped on our sailboat. Like I said, sailed over 5,000 miles through the Panama Canal, relocated to Florida, and really started over. We were below zero. We were in debt. He lost his engineering business. I lost my business that I had transitioned into. I'm a recovering attorney, or I like to say an attorney turned alchemist. And so I had left the legal profession, and because really you're held captive when you have a professional license like that, unless I wanted to sit for the bar exam again, some other place. Or I had no choice, really. So that was the impetus to get out of that, amongst other reasons, which I can share. But at any rate, Tom took a job for the first time in 25 years. He'd always been self-employed. And we started over. I was 50, he was 60, and we just had to rebuild things. And I had a great opportunity come my way with a startup that just took off in the anti-aging space. I was very interested because it was the year I turned 50 and I was starting to get the wrinkles, and I'm like, wrinkle cream, really? And they're like, just try it. So anyway, that was an amazing ride. But what that meant was I spent 2 decades in the network marketing industry in direct sales. And what that meant is I had a business I could really live from anywhere. So this was obviously way before COVID, way before people really thought about remote work in a big way. But it was something that I said, we finally recovered. It took years to get out of debt, rebuild our savings, and we were finally ready to buy real estate. And I actually had a background in real estate before law school. So we started looking at property, and I mean, it seemed like there was another bubble, and everything was so expensive because our dream was to have our boat in front of our house. And so you talk about waterfront property in Florida, you're talking huge real estate taxes, hurricane insurance. Even back then was really expensive. Now I'm sure it's probably double what we were even looking at. But I just said, I don't feel good about this. If I'm going to buy something, let's buy something that puts money in our pocket. Let's go to Isla. And I had discovered Isla Mujeres back in 1992. We'd been going there together since about 2000, maybe 2002. And every time we'd go, we'd look at property and new developments and condos and kind of dream about owning a place in paradise. And so when we got serious, we found something down there, and really it was not a plan to live there. We had no plan to live in the house or even abroad at that stage. We just were wanting to diversify our income. and buy a vacation rental property, really, that put money in our pocket. So that's really how it all started. And then at the time, we tried Northwest Florida. I'm a Minnesota girl. They use the words wind chill in the winter weather forecast up there. First winter wasn't so bad. Second winter, it was pretty cold. I said, honey, this is not what I had in mind. So we moved about a half hour north of Fort Myers area on the West Coast and lived there for about 4 years, renting, obviously. We couldn't buy anything, but we just weren't feeling the Florida vibe. And we'd bought this property and we had this big sailboat. And I'm like, we can just go down there and try it out and see if we like it. If we don't like it, like our house moves. A 2-bedroom, 2-bath condo that floats, this big boat that we had. So that's really what we did. It was just a trial endeavor. And then we just stayed. And as COVID came along, it was a pretty sweet place to be during COVID, I got to say. So yeah, the view actually behind me, if you're seeing the video, is the view from our oceanfront property. And we basically doubled the size and kind of turned it into our nest egg, our retirement income, which again was not really the plan, but that business I had started ended up going away for some strange reasons, but it actually ended up becoming our main source of income. You just never know. Life throws you curveballs, and being flexible, I think, is really the key to our success.
I like that you were approaching this concept called midlife retirement. What's the difference between midlife retirement and actual retirement?
That's a pretty deep subject, and that's actually where my work has evolved since my book came out. But I believe the soul did not come here to retire. So I'm anti-retirement, actually. And the more you get into this topic, I think the more you realize it's a dumb idea. It's not a finish line. It's the point of reinvention. And you got to have something that gets you out of bed every day. And in fact, I launched my YouTube channel about a year ago, May, and I'm getting more and more into this topic of longevity. If you look at the latest research, it indicates our soul, our cells have the ability to regenerate themselves all the way up to 120 or 150 years. So what if our life expectancy is really 120? It's not 80. It's not 75. So you start looking at retiring at 50. You're not even halfway through your life yet. Changes the dynamic, doesn't it?
Sure does. Yep.
And of course, it brings up a whole bunch of other issues, like how are you going to finance it? So I guess that's another reason to keep working. But even folks that have money, without that sense of purpose, they're not very happy individuals. And I'm sure you're familiar with the Harvard study on longevity and the largest study that's ever been done. And more, it's not really about the stuff, right? Or the money. It's really about the relationships and the community. And as my book says, how to retire in paradise on a shoestring budget, here's the rub. Paradise is internal. Right?
I agree.
Wherever you go, there you are.
You can make it a paradise. It's a decision you can make.
If you're not happy where you are, like just changing geography is unlikely to change your level of happiness.
I like your approach because it's been the way for a long time that you have to wait to retire. You retire at a certain age, which is 65, and now the government is telling people my age at 67 and a half, and you're too old to do anything at that point many times. You just don't have the spunk, the desire to get out and do all of that. So you're embracing this idea of retiring early and still enjoying life. And I like that.
Yeah. And one of the reasons I quit practicing law, I went to law school later in life after our divorce and in a moment of insanity, which that's a whole nother issue. But anyway, I quickly realized, I think I was climbing the ladder and it was against the wrong wall because the culture wasn't a fit for me. The work was okay, but I was a transactional attorney. I didn't go to court. I was sitting behind a desk, pumping out legal documents most of the time, which I was very good at, but That's one of the things. Also, it's something I teach is just because you're good at something doesn't mean that's what you should do, right? If it doesn't bring you joy. But what I most realized as I was watching my colleagues and watching the evolution of this career, I realized that my future probably meant dying at my desk because that's what most of them do. And I said, not this girl. I don't want to do that. And I quickly realized that I was in my 30s, my mid 30s. And so as I'm approaching 40, I'm going, I really don't think this career is compatible with the lifestyle that I want to live. And so that's really was the big, and then I was like, what else can I do? And then, like I said, you realize you're trapped with this bar membership that's California, and the other bars don't play nice in the sandbox a lot of times. So I'm like, I don't want to do that anyway. But I can see whether you're a nurse or any kind of professional, if that's what you have to go to, that's something that I've talked about too, is your first step, if you're a midlife professional, might be a career change before you think about a reinvention or whatever. So starting there with where you want to go next.
You talked about dying at your desk, and you're absolutely right. That's one of my pet peeves with these highway crosses, right? Because people die suddenly and they put up these roadside displays, crosses and monuments for the folks. More people than ever have died at their desk. And their jobs slowly kill them, and we don't do anything like that to recognize the lost life in that. So it's good that people are recognizing that life is short and that they should be able to go out there and explore and do the things that they want to do.
And on that note, so one of my next videos that's coming out is why so many people die right after they retire.
Yes.
And so that's the rub. So you're going to die at your desk if you keep working, right? And that. But then if you retire and you don't have anything else to do, there's a good chance that you could die early as well, because now you're missing that purpose and maybe that spark that did get you up. And you don't know it's coming. That's the worst part about it.
Exactly. When people talk about retirement, it's all about where are you going to live and how much money are you going to have. It's nothing about what are you going to do when you retire that brings meaning to your life and gives your life purpose.
Absolutely.
So you're going to have a book on that?
Yes, as a matter of fact, I'm so glad you asked. So yes. And I think I've already have the name for it. I got the domain, but Retire Rich. How to turn your golden years into your boldest years, I think is where we're going with this. And my book publisher says is when you start promoting your book, as soon as you have the idea for it. So I'm right on track here. It seems like people really are wanting this information because there is such a lack of information on the non-financial planning aspects of retirement. And that was really why I launched my channel, is I started looking to see what was out there. And oh, golly, there was one show, PBS did a Frontline series a number of years ago on retirement. And so I watched this just to see what the messaging was. Oh my gosh, it was awful. There were parts of it, there were some good stories, but most of it was like, I think you just want to take your life. You people in bedridden and with tubes, and just this picture was so dark. And I'm like, this is not good. This is not the future we need to have. We need some better messaging on this.
Yep.
And I got to say, being in Mexico, what you were talking about earlier about this forced retirement idea, I remember the gentleman we bought the boat from back in 2006. He was a pilot, a helicopter pilot for the DEA. I went to his retirement party. He was forced to retire at 55. They said, you're out of here. Now what? Don't feel too badly for him because he ended up moving to Hawaii and getting one of those cushy jobs for the helicopter tour companies over Hawaii. But still, how much talent, how much skill, how much wisdom is the American workforce losing because of this idea that this is an old age when science is showing that's just not the case. Okay. And one of the things I love about Mexico is they really honor and respect and revere their elders. They're incorporated into the fabric of the community and serve they're useful. They're useful folks in this culture. So that's something I think that the American culture could really learn from is don't discard this generation. And because the workforce not seeing as many people entering the workforce. So I think it's a resource that really needs to be respected and tapped into.
I agree wholeheartedly. Is Midlife in Paradise a podcast or your YouTube channel or both?
Great question. Midlife in Paradise is the YouTube channel. I did have a podcast before I launched the YouTube channel, and it was originally branded as Overseas Life Redesign. And the reason for that one is it was originally all interviews, because I just kept meeting all these fascinating people, and not all of them jumped on a 50-foot sailboat and sailed through the Panama Canal to move overseas. And so they all had these amazing stories and these businesses and all these different motivations. And so I just had a blast. It was just really a passion project of mine. And then my boutique hotel ended up being my sponsor. So that kind of worked out good. I had a little commercial in there for that. But that was how it started. And then I later rebranded it to Life in Paradise. So the last year and a half or so, I think there's about 145 episodes. About episode 100 was the death of Overseas Life Redesign and the rebirth of Life in Paradise. And I just started getting into more meatier topics and more, because the book had come out and I felt like, all right, they're expecting me to be more of an expert on these topics. And so I got to step out of the shadows, not just ask questions, but actually deliver content. And so it was fun. I love doing the research and diving into all of these studies. And I'm a book fanatic. So I just started digging into some of these topics and really trying to explain things in really relatable, easy to understand methods of communication. So yeah, so that is still there. It's on my YouTube channel. Actually, there's a podcast tab. And so if someone wanted to go back through those episodes, there's a playlist. Okay. So they're all just on the playlist there. And I do use a lot of that content if I'm talking about something in a video and I go, oh, I talked about this on a podcast, or I interviewed this person. If you want to hear their full story, you can go and check out this podcast, the full podcast of them. It's worked well.
Podcast went away, but you're still doing video.
Yes. So that was it. I'll tell you what, part of this over 50 thing, sometimes you got to get out of your comfort zone. I remember and you do grow and it becomes fun and it becomes easy. I'm sure you've experienced this as well, but I'll never forget my first podcast interview. I was terrified. I hardly even wanted to push the play button. And thankfully, the first lady that I interviewed was an author and she'd done lots of interviews. And so I just basically started her and she took, and after it was over, I went, oh, that wasn't so bad. And then you just evolve and grow and the questions got better and I felt better about engaging and so forth. And then when I knew, okay, if you want to really get people the information they need, YouTube's where it's at. You're going to have to do the video thing. And then I was like, oh my gosh, a video. Now here I am almost a year into it. And I'm like, okay, I got this, And so it's just that way whenever you try something new. That's the journey.
I love it. We touched on this a little bit ago, but there are some outdated ideas about retirement that actually work to shorten longevity. What do you think some of those are?
Interestingly enough, I believe I covered this on a podcast, but there was a book I read a number of years ago about how the mind is so powerful when it comes to our health, right? Mm-hmm. And so in this book, they were talking about a study where they actually proved scientifically that how you view longevity has a real impact on how long you live. And so if you have a positive perspective on aging, on average, you're going to live 7 years longer than if you view aging as a negative. And that's pretty profound. That's a big number, right? I think it's probably even stronger than that. In other words, I really think if you think that, oh, I'm only going to live to 80, there's a good chance you're going to drop dead at 80 or right around there. I think there is such a thing as self-fulfilling prophecy. And so that's why I'm pushing this 120, 150. Now, maybe you won't make it there. Maybe you don't want to, but you might make it to 100 if you think that's the end game. So by pushing that goalpost out farther, I think it really does us all a service in understanding that how we think really has a profound impact on our health and how we are going to age.
I would agree with that. In fact, I'd expand it even further and say that you might add 7 years to your life, but those are going to be 7 quality years to your life
Absolutely.
because you're so busy, you're focused on your purpose and having a meaningful life. Whereas just getting into what I call the retirement rut, where you wake up in the
Yes.
morning and you watch TV, you might go golfing, come home for lunch, take a nap, and then spend the rest of the day doom scrolling through news channels and Facebook and social media and things like that. That's no life.
No, absolutely. That's absolutely true.
In what ways is international retirement easier than people think?
Oh, wow. That's a big topic. In fact, that was what we talked about in my first workshop that I did, which my workshop eventually became the book. So all the information in there. But the big things that I covered were the myth. People think, oh, it's too expensive. I can't afford to move overseas. When the reality is, if you look at a budget, an average budget, you will see that most things are dramatically less. Housing being one, right? The cost of housing in the United States has, even since my book, it's just skyrocketed in how much it costs to live in the United States. There's variations geographically, some places more than others, but as a whole, and especially when you start talking about owning property and you start talking about the cost of insurance. One of the recent videos that I did was how concrete is the new gold. And here in Mexico, they build houses out of concrete. They're not stick houses. And you remember the 3 little pigs, right? The pig with the brick house had it going on. That's for real. And understanding that because even if you've got insurance for it, I mean, these poor people in California, these fires, even if they rebuild, what's that insurance going to look like? Are they going to be able to get it? And then the other big one that most people really don't get at all in the United States is healthcare. And I'm astounded how much people pay for healthcare for their insurance. I have a global insurance policy. I pay $155 a month for. It has evacuation coverage. The reason it's so inexpensive is it doesn't cover certain countries, one of which is the United States, except for 30 days of emergency care. I'm okay with that because the reality is the United States is number 1 in per capita spending on healthcare, and it ranks about number 37 in the world in quality.
I agree with that.
And Americans think, oh, we have the best healthcare in the world. No, you don't. You do not get what you pay for. And so if something serious was wrong with me, I could go to Europe. I could go to I could go anywhere that I wanted to and have treatment and have it covered under my insurance plan. I got about a $2,500 deductible, and it's half of that if it's in network. So it's a very reasonably, my husband's got on Medicare. He's got a Medicare Advantage plan. It covers him for emergency care outside the country. It works really well with it. But beyond that, and I do talk about this in the book, I did do a couple of episodes on how to get top shelf medical care at bargain prices. And I go through a lot of the costs of a physical, of a blood test, being able to just walk down the street to a lab and get your own damn blood test without a prescription from a doctor, being able to go in and get a mammogram, all these things. Most of the things I just pay out of pocket because it's so dang cheap. Tom and I went in for our physicals at 60 and 70 to a doctor on the island, British trained doctor, lived on the island for a long time. She used to be a gynecologist, but because she services the island, she's a GP. And she spent 30 to 45 minutes a piece with us, did, all the physical things. We brought in our blood tests with our blood tests from 5 years before. So she had them side by side, went through them line by line. We go to pay. It was 1,000 pesos. That's $50
Oh, my
US.
goodness. Wow.
The doctors give you their personal cell phone number down here. They make house calls.
That's incredible. Yes.
My husband had a kidney stone a couple of years ago. He went into Star Medica. It's like the Ritz of hospitals. It was unbelievable. These are things people don't even, like when we were in Florida, you couldn't even get an appointment for 6 months to
Right.
even see somebody. And I remember I got a referral to a new gynecologist, and one of the reviews said, you just have to make sure you get an appointment with her. So I called to get an appointment. They want to give me to a nurse practitioner, not her. I'm like, what am I going to see her for? I'm not going to see her. And I
Right.
said, well, no, I want an appointment with her. They said, oh, no, that's not possible.
Uh-huh. Yep. A friend
That's the sort of things.
A friend of mine from my hometown in Wisconsin has moved to Panama.
I did a video on this too. It's on my pets.com website, which also has a free guide if someone's interested. The top 10 questions about starting your overseas retirement. There's different nomenclature for these words, but to expatriate means to surrender your citizenship.
Okay.
I doubt that's what she did.
She did
probably,
not.
she may have dual or she has residency, but there's a lot of confusion around these terms. And that's actually one of the questions is, do I have to give up my citizen? Absolutely not. There's a Supreme Court case and you can have dual citizenship as an American citizen. So
she said one of the most common myths that people have is it's not safe to retire or live overseas. What do you think about that?
That's actually one of the top 10 questions as well that I've answered in that guide. And I do have individual videos on these topics as well on the YouTube channel. But it's like the way that I respond to that is the United States safe? Again, there are places in downtown Chicago you probably don't want to be in at 2
p.m.
or 2 p.m. So is Mexico safe? Mexico's a big country, just like the United States, a big country. There's a lot of variation. It depends on even like a micro parts of a city, right? It can be very different from one part of a city to the next. So there are probably less safe areas, like some of the border towns. There's some areas that the cartels are entrenched in. And I have actually a funny flow chart that I have in my guide for my vacation rental. But basically, it's if you're not going to get drunk out of your mind, if you're not going to go looking for drugs, you're more safe than you are in the United States in a lot of areas, especially like these all-inclusive resorts. People don't ever leave. Nothing's going to happen to you there. I am more concerned, honestly, I got to tell you, Greg, is I am really freaked out about crowds in the United States because of these mass shootings. That's one thing you don't see down here in Mexico is you don't see school shootings. You don't see some madman with an AR-15 that comes in and wipes out little school children. You don't see that the movie theaters or concerts or any of that stuff. The violence that's down here, like the cartels, they're targeted. There's no collateral damage. Like they're after somebody who they're tangling with. And they're as invested in the tourism industry as anybody. They don't want to they don't want to hurt the golden goose. Typically, they all agree, like there's certain things, there's a code of honor among thieves, if you will, but it's predictable.
How does experiencing different cultures really improve your life?
Oh, gosh. I've been doing it for so long, Greg, that I probably can't even appreciate the full breadth of it. But what I can say is, Tom and I were just talking about this. When he was a little kid, his dad took him and his brother and sister out of school for 3 weeks, and they traveled back in the day. This was a long time ago. This was in probably the late 50s or early 60s when people didn't really travel that much. But he said it was such an education. Yeah, they took us out of school for 3 weeks, but we learned so much. His dad was born in Cuba. He grew up in Puerto Rico. He was British, a British descent, but his father and grandfather were engineers like my husband. And so they worked in the cane fields. They worked for United Fruit and irrigation engineers and so forth. So he had a completely different experience than people growing up in the United States. And he wanted to give that gift to his kids. So and that's what Tom was just saying. They went to Martinique, and I forget all the places that they went, but they were in the Caribbean. And he said, Dad wouldn't just take us to the nice places. He would take us down these streets of these very poor people. And at that time, they weren't living in Newport Beach at that time. He was in Simi Valley up in Southern California. And he said it was really eye-opening for us because it's not everybody lives like we do. It really makes you appreciate what you have, number one, but it also gets you to understand that people are people. They're just trying to make a better life for themselves. They want their kids to have a better life than they did. There's so many common human values that we share. And I think traveling around the world, yeah, people do things a little bit differently. Their houses might look a little differently. Their food might look a little different. But at the end of the day, I think it really brings us all together when we can see the shared humanity. And also how I can't really think of too many places that I've traveled where people weren't welcoming and warm and friendly and helpful. I remember Tom and I went down to the Dominican Republic for an incentive trip for one of these all-inclusives. And we went a few days early and we took the bus. We always like to have the local experience. And we took the little guaguas, little vans, and then we got on the big bus. And then we got off the bus. We had to take a different bus. And we got off the bus and we weren't really sure where to go. A passenger gets off the bus, grabs our suitcase, walks with us, and takes us over to the correct bus that we needed to go on. We're the only white people on the bus. The bus is packed. And we would have loved to tip him. He was gone. This was not about money. This was just about kindness and helping a stranger. That's just one story. I could go on and on with stories like that. And it's interesting, having run our little short-term rental, how different people are in their perspectives. Like, we've had guests, Tom, I'll never forget, he came upstairs one time and he said, the people downstairs are like almost hiding behind the sofa. And I go, why? What's wrong? And he goes, the lady said, there's Mexicans walking on the walkway. In Mexico, people just, I think there's so much fear a lot of times. And it's that you're careless. You conduct yourself properly. You don't flash your wealth. You're not the ugly American. There's certainly better ways to travel than others. But I think most people are good and kind and want to help you if you run across a challenge, and even honest. We see stuff all the time. People leave their cell phone in a taxi and it finds their way back, or a driver's license or a credit card gets left behind. And there's so many good stories out there. And our news media likes to grab the negative ones.
I agree with that. When you first started this lifestyle and you moved into a sailboat, did you have to learn to sail yourself, or did your husband do it all?
That's a great question. I did not know how to sail. I loved being on the water. Like I said, I grew up on a lake in Minnesota. We were on the water almost every weekend, but not much sailing. Tom actually took me sailing on our first 2 dates, but I didn't know they were dates. That's a whole nother story. And I didn't know that he took me sailing because he wanted to find out if I got seasick. Yeah. And if I did, that was the end of the road for me, because this was a fundamental interest of his. I talk about that in my book, and I think in retirement, this is really a big deal because these things can come out. If there's a clash between these fundamental interests, it may not work. That relationship may not last. And so he was smart enough to say, this is the fundamental. He didn't even know it at the time, but that's really what he was doing. And I'm a cat lover. I've been a cat lover since I've been a little kid. So we actually sail with cats. We had 2 kitty cats with me. My 17-year-old orange cat is about 7,000 nautical miles under his collar. And fortunately, Tom loves cats. If he'd have said, I'm not really that fond of cats, I probably would have said bye. But so those interests are important. But it turns out I'm a very good navigator and I'm a very good helms person. And so Tom typically will adjust the sails and deal with most of that stuff. But it works for us. Our boat is set up for with a couple to do those things. So but I've learned a lot. I think I know enough to get by. I wouldn't say he was a racer. He was actually an international yacht racer. So he was a no bullshit sort of sailor when it came with the big boys. And I said, go have fun, honey. I would maybe do a little short one, but if I got to set my cocktail down, it seems like it's just too much work.
A lot of seasoned citizens will get into an RV and travel around the country with each other. And it's shell shock for them because they are confined to 400 square feet, but they can always get out and take a walk or go somewhere else when they're having a disagreement, or it's just they've got too much couple time. What is
Yes.
life on a sailboat like? How did you maintain your relationship?
And going back, so we bought the boat in 2006. We didn't leave California until 2010. So we spent 4 years sailing to Catalina,
Okay.
sailing down to Newport Beach, going to the Channel Islands. That's a mistake a lot of people make. They're like, oh, I'm just going to go buy a sailboat and sail the world. I wouldn't advise that because A, you're probably not ready physically, and B, the boat has not been tested. So that was good training ground for us to do that. And we did spend that was our beach house when we were in Southern California. We would work in the city of Orange, and then it was maybe 40-minute drive to the sailboat. So we'd pack up the kitty cats and the food and whatever. And sometimes we'd just stay at the dock. We had a beautiful view off the stern. But we really, okay. So here's the short answer. We got married on our honeymoon. We went down to the British Virgin Islands. We chartered a sailboat for 16 days, bareboat, just the two of us, anchored every night. And so that's pretty much a test. If you can do that as a couple and still love each other by the end of it, that's a pretty good test. But the longest time we were at sea together alone was about 4 days.
Okay.
We went off, when we left Mexico, went offshore. But the rest of the time, we're in a marina, we're on a mooring ball, we're going ashore. So it's not like it was months and months on. Not sure I'd be down with an Atlantic crossing, kind of weeks on it. And that's just not really my thing. But no, it matters. I'm in a Facebook group, Women Who Sail. And there was a lady who posted that she's having a hard time with her husband because he just clearly doesn't like it. And if the weather's bad, it's bumpy or whatever, I was like, are you having fun yet? A little snarky. And she was asking from the group, like, what do I do with this? And I'm thinking, next, if that's your lifestyle and it doesn't work, like, I don't see that reconciling because clearly that is a fundamental interest of hers. And clearly it isn't for him.
Right.
So that's going to be a tough one. Somebody's going to have to compromise or it's just not going to work.
What kind of planning do people have to do to prepare for this kind of living?
The passage, the journey, the moving, I should say, what is the word Tom uses for it? The delivery of our own boat over to Florida took a lot of planning and a lot of preparation. And what we did, there's a group that goes every year from San Diego to Cabo called the Baja Haha. And so we actually left San Diego with 165 boats.
Wow.
And sailed to Cabo, and then we kept going. What that does is it gives you a deadline. On this day, we're leaving. But it also gives you safety in numbers. There's a check-in every day. So when you're starting out a big journey like that, it's nice peace of mind to know that somebody's got to pay attention if you don't check in on the radio, on these morning calls and so forth. And you call in your position. And so once you're out on the ocean, not everybody's in that tight little group. Some boats are faster than others and so forth. But it was really a good way. It was a great way for us to start that journey. And then there's organizations. I am a big believer in affiliating with, groups, whether it's Facebook groups or organizations. We joined the Seven Seas Sailing Association, and it's a global group of sailors, and they have like cruising ports at different places where they have designated individuals who you can tap into if you need a part or you need help finding something on shore. There's like the welcoming committee and will help you get what you need. So there's all and I took courses. They offer classes. There was a course on sailing with pets taught by a veterinarian who is a sailor. And so he would go through, and it was great because there were plenty of tips for us as humans too. There are no doctors at sea. And so we bought a staple gun for big gashes. We bought the big spotting things. We were prepared for if something terrible did happen, you might get rescued at some point. You could bleed to death before then, right? You have to be resourceful yourself. So there's a lot of different things to think about. And depending on how, much of a planner you are, we're engineer, attorney, we're pretty methodical planning type people. So and Tom, this drove me crazy, but I love them. They do. Tom he got his captain's license before we left. And of course they share all kinds of information there. And that really helped with the lighting configurations on what is that boat out in the dish, out on the ocean. You could tell by the lighting configuration what it is, right? But he also liked to read disaster at sea books, which if I read those, I'd never leave the shore. But he does it from an engineering standpoint to say, okay, what did they do wrong? What could they have done differently, and would do stuff like that. And so I'm like, more power to you. I'm not reading. What's that movie? The one,
True Spirit?
The Perfect Storm.
Oh, okay.
I'm never watching that movie again. Like, I watched it once and I was like, oh no.
That's funny. If you could roll back the clock, is there anything you'd do differently?
Oh, that's always an interesting question. I'm tempted to say maybe I wouldn't have ended up with 3 houses in foreclosure back in 2008 because I invested in some property. I didn't really understand. I was a mortgage banker in a former life. I didn't really understand what had happened in the mortgage banking industry and all that subprime lending and all that. And so had I known that, maybe I wouldn't have bought those houses, but then maybe I wouldn't have left and done all these other things either. So it's like you tinker with one little thing, like
Yes.
you can really, the whole chain of things. So I guess I've adopted the philosophy of there are no mistakes. There's only lessons.
That's a great philosophy. Do you have any
Right.
lessons or advice for people over 50 who are struggling with finding meaning in their life or a passion?
Yeah, a couple of things I would like to say about that. One is what you focus on grows, right? And so going back to this longevity planning, if you're focusing on decline and ill health, and I had a gal, I did a little retreat at my house a number of years ago, and one of the attendees said, Dawn, what's your plan for long-term health care? And I said, my plan is to not need it, because the best healthcare plan that there is good health. So if you are focusing on that, like, that's probably what you're going to be attracting into your life. And I know illness can hit anybody, but the reality is focus on that good health. Focus on living till the day you die, living full out till the day you die.
How can people connect with you if they'd like to learn more about your adventures or just to follow you and what you're doing?
Sure. So YouTube is where I'm hanging out the most these days. I am on Facebook. I am on LinkedIn. I'm on Instagram. But yeah, probably the YouTube channel is going to be the most engaging and most current information that gets posted there.
Do you have a website?
I do. I have claimyourdreamlifebook.com is where you can check out the book. It's also on Amazon and anywhere books are sold. And as I mentioned, I do have the opats.com site. That's OPATS. It stands for Overseas Patriot. And like I said, there's a little video on that page and kind of talks about the difference between, I actually talk about the fact that expat isn't a good word. Who wants to be an ex anything? That's why I came up with the word opats. And I'm still an American. I'll always be an American. Grew up a Girl Scout, but I am an overseas patriot.
Thank you for
OPAT.
sharing your story with me today, Dawn. I find it fascinating. I hope others do too, and it inspires them to just ignore what the naysayers are doing and just embrace their dream.
Oh, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it, Greg.
Dawn Fleming is a vibrant example of what it looks like to claim your dream life, not someday, but right now. Her journey from financial hardship and professional burnout to building a purpose-driven lifestyle on the shores of Mexico is both courageous and inspirational. She and her husband now live in a beachfront property they initially purchased as a rental investment, and what started as a trial run turned into a full relocation, giving them the freedom to live on their own terms. Dawn's book, titled Claim Your Dream Life: How to Retire in Paradise on a Shoestring Budget, offers practical insights for people who want a different type of retirement. But as Dawn pointed out, true paradise isn't a place, it's a mindset. Her YouTube channel, Midlife in Paradise, dives into many of the non-financial aspects of retirement that are often overlooked, such as purpose, longevity, community, and personal reinvention. More than just relocating abroad, Dawn is passionate about helping others break free from outdated ideas of retirement. She believes the soul wasn't meant to retire, but to be repurposed, and she's proving that message by living with enthusiasm, curiosity, and generosity every day. Her philosophy emphasizes the importance of not waiting for permission or the perfect time to pursue your ideal life. Whether it's sailing across oceans, building community, launching new creative ventures, or simply exploring what brings you joy, Dawn reminds us that it's never too late to start over and to live boldly. To learn more about Dawn's journey, visit www.claimyourdreamlifebook.com or check out her video content on the Midlife in Paradise YouTube channel. If you're ready to design a fulfilling life after 50, Dawn's story is a masterclass on how to begin. That's all for this week's show. If you'd like to start living a more meaningful life, I encourage you to download our free guide to finding purpose, which was available at www.forwardfrom50.com. We'll have another inspirational interview on the next episode of the Forward from 50 podcast. Thanks for listening, and if you like this show, please consider leaving a review wherever you download the episodes.